Hello, everybody. This is Professor DeSimone back with another psychology lecture. And today's lecture is going to be on major depressive disorders. Today's psychology lesson. It's going to be mostly centered around that. So, let's jump right into it. So, today for our lesson plan, we're going to be majorly breaking down the components. Figured you guys would like that one. I'm starting early with the puns. And we're going to be starting primarily with, identifying what psychological disorders are, defining the subgenre of the focus of today's lesson, which is, major depressive disorders. We're going to be discussing diagnosis criteria or associated symptoms. We're also going to be touching a little bit later on the treatment options. And then we're going to be explaining how and why this concept is important in the field of psychology, as well as, maybe a couple fallbacks or critiques on the matter, a little bit of compare and contrast, the usual stuff. And, we're going to be relating and explaining the topic of major depressive disorders to the real world. So, how does it apply to everyday life? How does this knowledge, change beliefs, attitudes, behaviors? And, the conclusion, we're just going to review key concepts and discuss the importance of the subject and, how things have benefited the field. So this is a very sensitive topic. And if you or a loved one is experiencing any depressive thoughts, please seek out professional help. It is available. We're going to be talking about a couple different ways that it can present itself. So please, if anybody feels uncomfortable by this, proceed with caution. But it's a relatively tame lesson today. So now that we've gone over a bit of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be going over the symptoms that are associated with this disorder. So Nolan and Hockenberry actually say that major depressive disorder is often called the common cold of psychological disorders. Fun little fact for you. And for good reason. They say it's actually among the most prevalent psychological disorders. And in terms of its physical, psychological, and economic impact, it's one of the most devastating of any illness worldwide. So that's pretty big. And as you could see below or, throughout our slide, it can manifest itself in multiple ways. Starting off at the top, we see emotional symptoms, and that includes sadness, guilt, worthlessness. Then it goes into cognitive symptoms, and that has difficulty thinking, lack of concentration, poor memory. The behavioral symptoms follow suit, which can include crying, withdrawal from social situations, general isolation from, I'd say, the outside world. And physical symptoms, it can present itself in changes in weight and appetite. Might be really hungry, might end up binging, you might end up, becoming more not hungry and starving yourself. It can include sleep difficulties where you're sleeping too much, you're sleeping too little, diminishes sexual interests, and just presents a general restlessness and nervousness. And the difference with major depressive disorders is that it's noted that they must be present, the symptoms, for at least 2 weeks or longer. And that's courtesy of our friends Nolan and Hockenberry. We love them. So getting into kind of the nitty gritty of it, major depressive disorder is primarily defined as a mood disorder characterized by extreme and persistent feelings of despondency, worthlessness, and hopelessness, causing impaired emotional, cognitive, behavioral, and physical functioning. And there's our Nolan and Hockenberry once more. So it was stated by them that in terms of lifetime prevalence, many researchers have estimated that about 15% of Americans will be affected by major depressive disorder at least some point in their lives. However, some researchers even suspect that number is too low. Now, when you put that into perspective, 15% of hundreds of millions of people is quite a lot. And when we say hundreds of millions of people, we're strictly talking about the United States. If we're talking worldwide, you can only imagine how many can be incorporated into that number. And, without research, studies, and treatments, a lot of those people might end up in debilitating or even fatal situations. One prominent feature of MDD is recurrence. And when you compare it to Nolan and Hockenberry's words themselves, when they say some point in their life, that isn't limited to just once. They don't say just once in your life, they say some point. And so a lot of the key research on major depressive disorders focuses on treatment. And that's because of how intense the symptoms can present themselves. So as you go through textbooks and peer-reviewed journals and whatnot, you'll see a lot of theses, trials, and experimentation, particularly because one, symptoms present themselves very differently for a lot of people. But more importantly, treatments are not limited to one cure-all. There's simply no one quick fix solution. And because of that, it is very important for mood disorders to continue to be studied by scientists and psychologists because of the ever changing culmination of outcomes. Because of this, there's certainly a strong variety of research that covers treatment options. That you have psychotherapies such as cognitive behavioral therapy. You have pharmacotherapies like the use of SSRIs, that doctors might prescribe or psychologists might prescribe. You have brain simulation therapies like ECT or, electroconvulsive, or just general lifestyle and complementary approaches. But I'd say weaknesses exist in the field just as any other. We're talking about comparing and contrasting, and Sanchez et al. Notes some of the most prominent ones, such as resistance to change from healthcare professionals and patients. That's a huge one. Regulation and approval of new treatments, and uncertainty about long-term efficacy and safety. Long-term efficacy and safety is a huge notion that still gets argued about. How is this going to affect me in the long term, as opposed to something that I take when I have a headache. If I take Tylenol when I have a headache, that's once in a while, right? How is it going to look or feel or react and affect your body if you're taking something once a day or once a week or once a month, whatever the treatment may be? So we're going to go ahead to our next slide here. And so now that you kind of start to get a sense for how and why this topic is important for the world of psychology, how does this begin to affect us? How does this affect our everyday lives? And if you recall from our symptoms, and I'll do you one better, I'll actually go back to the symptoms page for you. When you go back to our symptoms, there are just so many ways that MDD can present itself. And because of that, this disorder can disrupt just about any lifestyle, as it can impair your mental, your emotional, your physical, your cognitive state. And depression, as seen from a more conservative viewpoint, I'd say really begins to challenge the already extreme difficulties that people suffering or people, experiencing MDD already face. And I think it kind of ups the ante. So Higson and Sweeney present this great argument about, poor stigmas that surround the mental health world and ultimately how it makes it more difficult for those suffering to seek help. And what they say, and I quote, is many young people experience at least sub-threshold depression symptoms, which impact their functioning. Yet, access to evidence-based help is limited, with barriers such as service thresholds, stigma, and a lack of knowledge about mental health and available services. But one way to ensure young people have access to free, early, immediate, and anonymous help is through online self-help single-session interventions. End quote. And I love how they kind of threw in that end piece of offering kind of a solution to this problem. And I'll even add to that, but that by pursuing and expanding access to those in need around the globe, and obviously earlier we were strictly talking about America and the United States and the people affected numbers wise there, but helping and expanding that access to those in need around the globe, through school counseling, through continued government funded research or psychologist training. Those are a few examples of how we can hopefully begin to broaden the perspective of those who are ignorant to the damage that can arise from leaving this disorder untreated. Because as we said earlier, leaving this disorder untreated can eventually become fatal. And, what we want is to bring a safer and more connected sense of community to schools, workplaces, or even urban environments. So going back, we're going to start talking about our conclusion. What are our takeaways? And I thought you might appreciate, what are our takeaways in a perfect world where everyone remembers the key concepts. So if you can walk away from this lecture kind of remembering these few bits, then you're good, you're set. So as we wrap up today, and we're touching on the takeaways, I hope that going forward you'll remember that major depressive disorders is foundational to clinical and research psychology. It serves as a model disorder for exploring the interplays between brain, cognition, and emotion, and expanding school counseling, funding for research, and comprehensive psychologist training. Again, just a few of those examples can both reduce ignorance about untreated depression's harm and foster safer, more connected communities in different places. So some of those key concepts, if you're kind of looking for more condensed version, would include prevalence and recurrence, symptom variability, a treatment diversity, field challenges, impact and stigma, and even broader, more inclusive solutions to benefit all. So that's where we're going to wrap it up for today's lecture on major depressive disorders. As I'm sure that, for the last 12 minutes, I've yapped your ears off plenty by now. So thank you guys for tuning in this week. And I hope that if some of you can resonate or know someone who resonates with any of these topics discussed today, that, going forward, you can give them a helpful hand, or you can point them in the right direction, or maybe even start the process for a kinder, gentler world out there. It's a really big thing to be dealing with MDD. And, personally, I struggle with it myself. And, it's been a long time coming and a lot of hard work, but it's possible and it's doable. And it's lectures and conversations and discussions and information like this that really drives the people to see bigger, to see beyond themselves, and hopefully get where they need to be. So this is Professor DeSimone signing off. We're just going to go to our lecture slide just in case anybody wants to question where we got our stuff. And I hope you guys have a great day. Hopefully I will see you next week for next class. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.